From Rabobank, this is a RaboResearch food and agribusiness podcast.
Well, welcome. Consumer Foods to Go is back, and it's a new format. It's called Consumer Foods to Go Wrap, which is a monthly podcast and videocast, if I may call it that is going to, wrap up the month in food. So you were used to downloading or streaming the episodes of Consumer Foods to Go, and we may occasionally do that, but we will have this monthly wrap-up show for you each and every month, starting October 2025. So it's new to us. You may be listening to this, or you may be seeing us, which, I'd like to introduce the team to you, because you may not have seen us before. I'm Cyrille. And Maria, you all know, she is a senior analyst at the Rabo team. And Tom, you may also know from previous podcasts, he's the senior analyst in the US. Maria sits in Europe. And Maria, this is probably fun for a lot of our people that are now looking at you and seeing you on screen, because remember when we were at this European Food Service Summit, then someone came up to us and said, "Hey, you're Maria," because she's never seen you, and now they can. For those people that are streaming this episode and listening to it as a podcast, a bit more bandwidth is required for it, given that we do this on video, but hopefully that is fine. So this is the first part of this videocast, and it's called, hello, and please wait to be seated. We have a sort of a restaurant feel around this podcast, so please be seated, and a menu will come to you, which is the second part of the podcast. And I'd like to open this one. Guys, it might be a bit controversial, but the US food system might just be changing. No, Tom?
There's a lot of change underway.
That's a lot of change underway. And, we've seen the MAHA movement. We have seen RFK Jr. coming out with, pressure on food companies in the US. And as a result of which petroleum-based dyes are being removed from packaged food, which is really, really interesting. But what we like to do in this section, and it's new, but is to find a news item that, caught our attention and should catch your attention. And for me, that was Americans for Ingredient Transparency, which is, what is it? Well, it's really interesting because it's a coalition of food and agri lobby groups, or other a coalition of how do you call that, Tom? Industry groups. That's the word I was looking for.
Industry associations, and business and brands and operators themselves.
And a lot of them that are trying to come up with, a uniform voice regarding health, basically health and food, because that's of course the important point here. And I have to read out this. I can't do this from the heart, but one of the things that this coalition is trying to achieve is avoid an ever expanding patchwork of disjointed food, beverage, and personal care regulations, which is interesting because in the US, there's federal, the state. In California, there's now ultra-processed food regulation being rolled out potentially. So I think that is really interesting. And what I find really interesting, and Tom, perhaps you can chip in later on from a US point of view, is that they are trying to look at removing grass, which is generally recognized as safe, and working on more legislation and regulation around the use of certain ingredients, building a process around it, building some regulation, as I said, around it. And this is, Maria, really interesting, perhaps from a European point of view, this coalition is trying to achieve some front of pack labeling, a nutrition system. Nutri-Score. We've done a podcast on this in, 2019, from a European point of view. Are we going to see that? So Tom, perhaps what's your take on that? Because this is, there's a lot happening in the US. Nothing is concrete, but it's definitely changing the food system.
Yeah, I mean, we might actually be at an inflection point when you zoom out and think about all the things going on in the U.S. food system, like you said, with MAHA, with GLP-1s, with pressure on food manufacturers and so on. But honing in on this specific topic, this is another big shift we're looking at, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. But thinking about there's positives, there's negatives, and then there's neutral aspects of it, and then I have questions. So as far as as far as the positives go, I mean, transparency is a great thing, and more transparency is important for the U.S. consumer. They want it, and so a movement towards that is excellent. Like you said, though, there's lots of patchwork within our current regulatory system as far as labeling. I mean, everything, but as far as labeling goes specifically, you've got California with Prop 65, you've got New York with their own, transparency around sodium and sugar labeling, and there's consumers are reading more labels in general. So it's all kind of heading down this road, and I think that that's a positive change for the consumer. As far as things that are a little more, again, not as positive, I would say this could hinder innovation a little bit. It slows things down potentially.
Yeah.
It could be another additional cost for food manufacturers, which
without a doubt
is the last thing they want, because they've had nothing but increased costs for the last since 2021, when we had very heavy inflation environment. And then I do look at the associations and groups involved with this, and I scratch my head literally and think, where's the consumer voice, and what does the consumer really feel about this? And that's a question for me. It might make ultimately might make our processes look a little more like what you guys have over there in Europe, and you seem to have a good food system.
I think that's partly the point. So I talked about front of pack labeling as one of the aims for this coalition. That is something that in Europe we don't have officially, but some retailers have the Nutri-Score system or something similar, and it varies from country to country. The other thing, of course, is regulation. So not the grass that generally recognized as safe for new and novel ingredients. There's a whole novel ingredients process here in Europe. The unfortunate thing, of course, is, and that's what Americans should recognize, it can take up to 5 years. When you produce a product that comes from precision fermentation, in the US it might be accepted quite quickly. Over here it can take, as I said, up to 5 years to get approval, if you get it. So products will come to the market slower and also at a cost. So it might stifle and slow down innovation. But this is catching the attention, and why do I bring this up in this podcast and videocast? Is that this is a topic that is just recurring. That America is changing in terms of the food system, and you had MAHA, and now you have the coalition, and there may be more happening. So for the audience to stay tuned and tuned in to this topic. Can I then hand over to you, Tom? What did you see in the past month that you think the audience should notice?
Well, I guess a funny one is and it's appropriate given our conversation about the shifting labeling and ingredients. The time traveling nutritionist. I don't know if any of you saw that little clever video making the rounds online, but in short, for those that haven't seen it, it's a husband and wife sitting down to eat some eggs, and the time traveling nutritionist runs in and says, "Don't eat the eggs; they're bad for you." And then he comes back and says, "Wait, just the yolk's bad." And then he comes back and says, "Wait, eggs are good." And it's just what we've seen.
But the steak. For those that have seen the video, the steak is bad.
The steak is bad. So fats are bad. Fats are good. Some fats are good. Some fats are bad. Sugars are good. Sugars bad. Refined sugars are bad. It's just never ending. And I mean, we work in this industry, and it still leaves us thinking like, what's good, what's bad. I mean, and if you ask a doctor, if you ask a food scientist, if you ask a food manufacturer, if you ask somebody on the R&D side, if you ask a consumer, if you ask an influencer, nobody agrees on what is healthy. And it's like we all, we have a very high level. I mean, particularly in the US, and I know in Europe, similar. Everybody thinks they're healthy and they're eating healthy, or we have a very high rate of people who are saying, "I'm healthy, I'm eating healthy, I'm taking care, I'm reading labels, this and that."
Yeah.
But you might have somebody who says, "I'll only have the pizza if it's gluten free, even if they're not, even if they don't have celiac disease." And then suddenly it's gluten free, so it's healthy. So there's just this misperceptions around what is healthy.
It is so interesting because there's a disconnect between science, food producers, food retailers for that matter, and the consumer, and all sorts of moving parts.
It is, and we're trying to put more clear guidelines. By we, I mean the industry and consumers. All the players are trying to put more guidelines around what is healthy, but I still think it's a very ambiguous definition. But where it's relative to the consumer, and it's not helped by the fact that there's a lack of trust. We've seen a loss of trust in established, historically trustworthy groups. Doctors. Lack of trust in doctors since COVID is we've seen an uptick in that.
Yeah, there's been many pieces of research done on that, which perhaps warrants even a separate podcast at one point. So,
yeah.
But again, this is a point that well, the U.S. food system is changing, but we don't necessarily know in what direction. It may or may not be science-led. Apologies for that. Moving over to Europe. Sorry, that's the other side of my screen. Maria, what did you see in October that is catching your attention, or was catching your attention, and should be known to our viewers or listeners?
Well, being in Europe and in the month of October, I think it's almost compulsory to talk about Anuga, because it's the largest food industry trade fair in Europe. Every 2 years, takes place in October. And we went there. I believe many of the company's executives that are listening may have been there. But sometimes, 4 I see more than 2. So what were my takes after visiting Anuga? There are a few things that surprised me or just I found interesting. The one was, it seemed like a revival of Expo West a couple of years later.
Yeah. But how long is the time lag? How long is the time lag, Maria? 4 years, 6 years?
No, I think it's 22 years is the time lag.
2 years, okay.
There was protein everywhere. And I don't mean protein in the sort of meat pavilions and something like that, or the dairy pavilions. No, in the packaged food pavilions, you had crisps with added protein, cereals with added protein, anything you can imagine with added protein. And the higher, the better. Shakes with 40 grams protein, you name it, it was all there. It was a revival of Expo West 2 years later. So it has become a big thing in Europe, protein.
Was there much plant-based?
I don't know. And I don't know how this matches with ultra-processed food, because I don't know how you can manage to have crisps with extra protein without ultra-processing them. But that's a different question. It's just an observation. Protein was everywhere. Another thing that, given that this was in Europe, and Anuga has also other events in other parts of the world, was Asia. Asia was everywhere. On the spotlight country was Korea, South Korea, but it was not because of that they were mega represented. They were present, but the number of stands from the South Korea, I believe they were not much greater than any other Asian country, but there were many of them in total, in particular Chinese exhibitors.
This was so interesting. I was there as well. That's fascinating.
Everywhere. At one point, it came so obvious that I thought, it's me. I got lost. I'm walking twice around the same block. Can't be true. So I looked at the catalog, and it had as many entries as the two standard leaders in terms of number of exhibitors, which are Italy and Spain. China in Europe, addressing the predominantly European audience, had as many exhibitors. So they were all there in all kinds of products, in all kinds of segments. So those were two, I think, the most striking differences compared to other years.
And so why were the Chinese there? That's the big question. Is it partly because of trade and the barriers that are being put up into the US? Is it just that they see Europe as a market anyway to provide more affordable products, differentiated products? Are they fitting into the taste profile of Europeans? Don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I think it can be a mix of opportunities driven by perhaps lower costs, but also trying to place here innovation. We saw, for example, something that has been around a lot of time, going back to crisps, seems to be the product of the day. We also have here vegetable crisps, sort of thinly sliced crisps that look like crisps, but are made from aubergine or eggplant or any other vegetable. They look like chips.
Yeah.
But what they were proposing were pieces that looked exactly like a dried piece of aubergine or courgette, and they were sort of sold as crisps, as a snack. Yep. They tasted salty, they tasted similar to the European alternatives, but they looked much more natural, much closer to the original product.
Yeah.
So that was something relatively innovative, and it was being pushed by a couple of Chinese producers.
And it was actually quite nice. I tasted it. It
tasted nice. I didn't see the nutritional characteristics. We only tried them. But it was innovative, and they were pushing it in the European market. Also some ingredients. So it can be a mix of reasons, or perhaps trying to shift things that they were perhaps trying to be addressed originally to the American market. I don't know, but the fact is that they were there and very, very present.
Yeah. I think that you're spot on. I walked the floor as well, and protein and Asian food, or perhaps even global food, don't rule. I also was surprised to see how many companies from Argentina were there. Really, why? But it is the food palettes, food production, food consumption, demand are changing rapidly.
Another fun factor, talking about global food, which indeed global flavors were quite well represented, was, for example, a Danish company proposing Mexican food.
Of course.
So there were also these kind of bizarre combinations.
Yeah.
I leave it for the audience to decide.
It is where the market is, and that's where these companies are jumping into. So this was the end of the first section, the menu section of the Consumer Foods to Go Wrap podcast and videocast. Now we move to the specials. And in the specials, we are going to, basically pitch one piece of research that was done by RaboResearch recently, which we think is really interesting for our audience, viewers and listeners alike. That they should be paying attention to, and also come up to us for more information. And for Maria and Tom, they have a challenge because their pitches of these research will be 1 minute and 1 minute only, and I'll track. And mine will be longer, but that's just this time. Next time around, we might do it differently. We have to figure that out. So here's mine. And this is a piece that we wrote and launched, I think in the month of October, it might have been the end of September, which was called Mind the Gap. And it was co-written by me. I was the co-author, but it was mostly written by Sebastian Schreien, who is known to you, at least for those that listen to the Consumer Foods to Go podcast in the past. He's a private label expert. And he's always there when we do the PLMA podcast, as you probably know. What we noticed is that there is a price gap between private label and brands in Europe. So Tom, this is not your story. Maria, yes, this is ours. In retail, private label and brands, this price gap that's always been there is been increasing because of inflation. A number, the Dutch market. So prices of food because of inflation have moved up. Well known to everybody. In 2021, the price gap between private label and brands was about 32% on average, all categories in retail. This price gap has increased by 8 percentage points to 40% by 2025, which is phenomenal. It's just a huge gap. And this, of course, impacts consumer shopping behavior, because that's partly why we're interested in this. Though that's not the entire point. The point is much more, and this varies from category to category and from product to product, that the absolute price gap has also increased. And so the sticker shock that the consumer has, especially around brands, and to an extent with private label, but especially around brands, is an issue. And it's an issue for the retailer. So we are looking looking at this gap, and thinking about what retailers are going to do in terms of the structure of the shelf. So you have affordable products, you have private label products, there's brands on there, there's premium brands on there. And this gap, how is that going to be filled? Is that going to be filled? We believe so. We believe that that for retailers, it is an opportunity to, fend off the onslaught of the hard discounters, which you see across Europe, but also try the supermarket to become more attractive for consumers by offering something at a different type of price point between private label and the brand. And we see two solutions for that. One, premium private label might be coming back. It's never been away, but this might actually be a reoccurrence, a resurgence of premium private label. So better, if I may say so, quality food products, but at a higher price point, to have the consumer trade up again from the regular private label to premium private label. The other opportunity, of course, is to introduce new brands at the lower price points. We may call them B brands, don't know, could be new brands, but at least at a lower price point than the existing A brand, which is also an opportunity. So, the takeaways for us is that private label companies really need to think about the premiumization opportunity that might be there. Not easy, because you do need to do innovation and then have discussions with the retailer. The challenge is for A brands, as in, is this gap there and what will happen? The opportunity is there for companies that have a brand that is currently not on the shelf and might actually fit in quite nicely. So this is something that we think is a really important trend. We've written a quite extensive research paper on this, which I think is worth a read. So that's why I'm pitching this to you. Any comments, Maria, Tom?
No, indeed. It can be the reintroduction or the reinvigoration of the premium private label, or a renaissance of the big brands that have been gradually losing weight in the past, perhaps 20 years, at least in Europe. They used to be much more present 20 years ago. So if the first case is the manufacturers that do private label that will jump in, if the second case, who will be picking up this chance? Will be the A brand owners? Would be local operators? It's an open question.
Yes. So, this was a 3-4 minute pitch. So I hope this worked well, and please reach out for the paper on it, or a conversation about this topic, because I think this is a brilliant topic to discuss. Maria, in Spanish pace. Yes, sorry. Yes.
Spanish pace, which is sort of twice as many words per minute as any other language. No, I won't do that. But I will share my pick with the audience, which is the Global Poultry Quarterly.
Written by Nandirk Mulder, or coordinated by Nandirk in
coordinated our team? By Nandirk Mulder. He's the global analyst, but he has support from local specialists. And there are a couple of reasons for me to pick up this one. First was just a coincidence. I was reading, I believe it was yesterday, that the cases of avian influenza are again increasing.
Yes, they are.
So that's a source of concern. He speaks about that on the page of the paper, but also the fact that poultry consumption is increasing everywhere, and also as an ingredient, and it's also increasing in restaurants as an alternative to beef, also because of this obsession for protein. Yes. And thirdly, because in Asia there is still the process of diet evolution and animal protein consumption going up. So it is, of course, a mature product, but the growth in demand is there. So far, we have seen that the growth in supply is not so good at keeping up with the demand, and that is giving as a result higher prices. And with what we hear now, price volatility and higher prices are likely to stay for the coming near months, for the next few months. I mean, the poultry has a relatively short life cycle or production cycle, but nevertheless, count on 6 months of volatile prices. And I leave it there.
Yes, for those that are listening, I was pointing to my watch.
Yes.
No, but I have to agree. I think meat prices in general, which is especially for those that are in food service that are listening to this podcast, but also in retail, I guess. I think this is a really interesting topic, and it's good that you flagged the Global Poultry Quarterly and all our poultry research that we've done, or for that matter, animal protein research, because it's a lot of movement. So, Good one. I like it. Tom, I know this is going to be animal protein related as well.
Yeah, it's very close. So I want to talk about eggs.
Which in the US is such a thing.
Yeah, hot topic. Our colleague Christine McCracken wrote about this recently. She wrote From Commodity to Concept, How the US Egg Industry Reinvented Itself. Great report talking about, and I think it's relevant for what we're discussing here about policy changes and changes in definitions and ingredients and kind of our earlier conversation. The egg industry has kind of gone through this with, different regulations popping up, forcing the egg industry to change. And if you look at the egg shelf today versus say 10 years ago, it was a lot of brown, yellow, cardboard packages. Today, the egg shelf is brightly colored. There's transparent packages where you can see the eggs and different colored eggs and so on. It has really evolved, and the egg industry, the egg manufacturers have shifted from being a commodity-based price taker, and we've seen an increase in price makers who are now branded operators, really driving what Christine calls concept eggs, which are eggs that are say pasture raised or antibiotic free, and these are higher margin products. And it comes back to that kind of that story of how are the food players going to adjust with all the changes that we see going on in the industry? When you've got new regulation popping up, as the egg industry did with requirements around caged animals driven by consumer welfare concerns for chickens, how does that industry adjust? And what her lessons were that she shared from this report were: be proactive about these standards. Take it early. It can help you limit the fallout later on, even if it's ambiguous. I mean, because some of these definitions weren't totally clear about what do you need to do. So be proactive, though. Move, and you can move from being a price taker to a price maker. Invest in flexible infrastructure and a supply chain where you know the ins and outs, and you're nimble and can adjust. And I know that's not easy for everybody, but a lot of the food industry has been working on this since 2021 anyways, but that's another lesson that we learned. And then building brand equity and customer engagement. So that was another shift that she highlighted is, the egg industry really started to understand the consumer and what they were looking for. Yeah.
This is a phenomenal story of moving away from being a commoditized product, a price take, as you said, to becoming value add and higher margin.
She did a great job of highlighting that for other industries to really think about. And lastly, they align with the retailers. And so you understand your customer and the end customer, and you can really start to align your products with that. And so, we've seen an increase in the value for the egg brands as a result. Great example. Yeah.
Yes. So these are 3 examples of research that were written, and we write a lot. Hope this is of interest to you. Feel free to reach out to us and get those pieces of research sent to you. And perhaps you use me as the one to write to, cyrille.filott@rabobank.com. This wraps up the specials, which is the research, the insights that we provide as a group. And let's go to the next section, which is made to order. What is this section about? And by the way, we need you as viewer or listener in the future for this. We will answer questions asked by you on anything that you have top of mind, as long as this is in the food sector. It could be any topic. What we've done this time is to pick a topic that our clients ask us, the people that we talk to. We go and visit a lot of companies in the food sector. We are at a lot of events, so what is front of mind and top of mind right now? And in Europe, let me kick off. Perhaps surprisingly, it's something that the US, Tom, has been talking about for the last 1.5 years, perhaps 2 years. GLP-1s. Ozempic. It's really, really interesting how many requests we get on a daily basis now to talk about it, because it is a fundamental shift. It is a fundamental shift to the market. I get really hyped up about it because there's so much changing suddenly in the food market, not only in the US with what we talked before, but this is a potentially fundamental and dramatic change in the food market, if provided this becomes a lifestyle. Because we don't know what's happening around GLP-1, so we may do a separate podcast on that. Again, we talked about it before, by the way, about a year ago in a podcast, but it's been evolving quite quickly. But, you know, from GLP-1 point of view, people can use it once, people can go on and off, on and off, on and off, or perhaps do a maintenance type of usage of the drug. It has a lot of implications for the food sector. And again, listen to the podcast, and we will have some research on this. So we highlight it next time in this video cast podcast as well. Reason why we get the question now in Europe is that we believe that in the UK, which is a country, by the way, also with high obesity levels, about 5%, perhaps even 6% of adults are now on Ozempic or Wegovy or those type of drugs, which is suddenly a big number, and I think other countries are following as well. So, Tom, what do you see in the US happening in this respect? Because things are evolving so quickly in GLP-1s.
Yeah, the GLP-1 environment is, it's interesting. But you do get a mixed take from the industry of it's not, it's not definitive at this point just how big of an impact it is. We, as the Walmart CEO said, it's fewer. They're seeing fewer calories. We do know that, and we do know that the studies have shown that people are eating fewer salty snacks, sweet snacks, and those types of products. Yeah. But they are eating more proteins. So back to the demand growth we saw in poultry, and also in beef and so on. There's been some studies that have showed that a person on GLP-1 is actually looking for more protein-based diets, or they're eating protein more frequently. Volume-wise, we're not quite sure how much that uptick is. But we know that there's a pretty double-digit uptick in somebody who goes on GLP-1 and their desire for a higher protein meal. So it's evolving quickly. It's having an impact, and everybody's kind of scrambling to say, what does it mean for me, and what can I do to, what products can I make that align with this type of lifestyle and this type of change?
Yep. So the audience, in the next episode, which will be launched in a month from now, this could return in the made to order section if you ask us a particular question on this topic, or it will appear in the special section because we've written research about it with that. Maria, what is it that you were asked about recently that you think our audience should know about this?
It's not something radically revolutionary, but when sort of three different entities come with the same sort of question, then you realize it is starting to be a trending topic. Now, it is about how to align or tweak slightly my product portfolio to align it better with the new consumer trends. So it's not about radical innovation, it's about this is my specialty, this is my core business, how can I sort of marginally change it and pick up in the current trends. And one of the reasons was, let's consider where can we get a bit higher prices, because the food manufacturers start to get the impression that retailers are indeed looking for something that is a bit more interesting to attract the consumer, a bit of innovation, but not radical changes. Yes. So they are trying to figure out, should I go with my product to another market? How can I do that and make that product interesting? Or how can I repackage what I normally do to make it more adjusted to the new consumer trends?
Yes. Okay. So incremental innovation, Tom. Is that the right way to say it? You did a piece of research on that about 2 years ago in the US. Oh, we're so behind in Europe, Maria.
Exactly. One of the things that they were thinking in one case was not even incremental innovation as in different products, but even different packaging, which was also something more mentioned on the incremental innovation. But their site now, or their target, is to capture these clients in retail that are willing to trade up occasionally and move up to pick up interesting products. So with the idea of making consumers read it up.
The gap.
The gap.
To some
Perhaps
extent,
it's the gap.
yeah. Is gap or is even selective premiumization? I keep buying private label, but on this thing that is new, I get the higher price.
Yeah, that's good. Also, yeah, that's even.
Yeah. That was
That
some
maybe-
of the themes that were on their mind when they were thinking about adjusting to the new consumer.
I have flashbacks to a report that we did in 2014. I've been doing this way too long, which was called the hybrid consumer.
I remember that one.
Which is Tom is just looking with a blank stare. What is he talking about? Which means that the consumer might be very selective, but that the middle is being squeezed, and that so they might stay with affordable products and occasionally have the premium products.
Cyrille, this is already happening in a very obvious way in food services.
Yes.
So the hybrid consumer, it's back.
It is. I would say so. We need to look at that one again.
Yeah. Something to explore. Hey Tom, for you to wrap up this made to order section of the video cast podcast.
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple questions on private label. So it kind of links back to your discussion on minding the gap, Cyrille. The U.S. we are at least 10 years behind the EU as far as our private label penetration in retail.
You're behind on something.
Yeah, we're behind on something. And it's private label. And ironically, I believe it's a European that's driving a lot of the private label shift. Aldi is really a key player in the evolution of private label in the US. So that was the question that came to me recently was there's a lot going on, inflation, Walmart launching better goods and other, retailers launching private label brands.
Yep.
But I was asked, what do you really think is there one main driver? And it is always tough to answer that type of question. But if I had to pick one, I would say Aldi is probably most in the driver's seat as far as the evolution of private label or revolution or renaissance of private label that's happening in the US. They are, 80, 90% private label products. They are price focused. They want to keep costs low and prices right for consumers. And they're also innovative. They have new, interesting products. And they're rebranding, and so that's kind of what drove this
rebranding to a brand.
They're rebranding to Aldi, yes,
to Aldi, which is really interesting. So they feel the time is there, that they have sufficient share of mind that they can do this.
Yeah,
really
so
interesting.
No more, mixed brands on shelf. It's all Aldi brand now, or majority Aldi brand now. If it is store brand, do you have that in Europe, or are you still mixed as far as does Aldi have a store brand?
No, it's mostly fancy brands at Lidl. I'm more familiar with Lidl, but that's just fancy brands still.
It's curious that they're deciding to do that in the U.S. I think that it might be a little bit of a different strategy. But I guess when our footprint, their footprint in the U.S. is on a national scale much bigger than what the individual markets would look like in Europe. I don't know if that plays at all into.
And partly the US is just a different market with a different type of consumer and a different mind set regarding brands. There's a reason why private label, and we've talked a lot about private label in the US before, but there's a reason why it's 10 years behind. So, but that makes sense. I think it's about recognition. And Aldi is just, and providing the positive vibe, I guess, that Aldi now currently has in the US market.
They have some diehard fans. Everybody I know is now going to Aldi.
Maria, he started the sentence with "we," but he didn't want to. He wanted on to say, he didn't want to say. But
there is a hybrid consumer again. Now we have a name for the hybrid consumer. It's called Tom.
Tom.
I go to Aldi, and then I'll go to the local butcher.
Whole Foods. And Whole Foods.
And then Whole Foods. Swing by Whole Foods.
Not Trader Joe's. Yeah. Alrighty. Good. Let's ask for the bill and basically wrap up.
Check, please.
Check, please. Yes. So, well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Maria, for joining this first episode of Consumer Foods to Go Wrap, which is the monthly wrap on things that we see in the market, things that we've read in the market, things that our clients are asking in the market, but much more on point than we did with Consumer Foods to Go, which was much more on going deeper. This is what's new. But hopefully the audience, the listener, the viewer, it triggers something with you that you come to us and you have a further discussion, or bring a topic, and that's what we really, really hope. Bring a topic that we should discuss next time in the made to order section, and we have even happy to name your name if you're if that's what you like. Just come to us, and the 2 or 3 best questions we will discuss here in the podcast, and see what will happen, and see whether it fits the thinking, because we're researchers. We just think a lot about food, so whether it fits the thinking of what we do in food. So I thought it was great. This was the first episode. The next episode will be completely different, but it will follow the same menu with, way to be seated, the menu, the specials, and the made-to-order section. So thank you, Tom, again. Thank you, Maria, again. And thank you, dear listener and dear viewer, for, what I used to say on Consumer Foods to Go podcast, downloading or streaming this episode of Consumer Foods to Go. Just listening or viewing this episode. Thank you so much, and we'll be back next month.
Thanks for listening to this latest RaboResearch Food and Agribusiness podcast. To hear more up-to-the-minute expert analysis, search for Rabobank on your favorite podcast app and follow our channels. Visit research.rabobank.com for more.